I read 8 books in the month of June, and even though it was a pretty low month quantity-wise, it was a great month quality-wise. The first book that I read was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Our main character, Tress, is very contented with her lot in life. She loves her existence on the rock, which is her home. She likes baking, she likes to make tea, she likes to visit with the neighbor boy and banter with him on the daily. She loves her family, and so she really has no reason to leave. She has no aspirations for great adventure in her life. But then when her friend Charlie, the neighbor boy that I spoke of, is taken across the dangerous Emerald Sea for an arranged marriage, and he's not heard from in some time, Tress investigates and she decides to set off to discover what has happened to Charlie and hopefully rescue him. Along the way, she'll meet pirates, she'll discover more about the dangerous seas that are made not of water but spores, and ultimately she's going to figure out that she has everything she needs in order to fulfill that quest. This became a new favorite. I had originally borrowed a copy from the library and decided to get one for my shelf afterwards. It's 5 stars. Even if you don't generally read fantasy as a genre, if you're a little nervous about getting into a long series, this is a great in, and if you do decide to read more from this world, there are plenty more books to discover, but it's a pretty self-contained story and it does a great job of catching you up on what you need to know in order to enjoy the story. The writing style, it's very witty, almost to the point of being pretentious at times, and I'm not sure if that's consistent with the author's style or if that was a choice that he made in order to evoke the feeling that you get when you're watching The Princess Bride or reading the book The Princess Bride. That was the first book that I finished in the month of June, and I loved it. The next book that I read last month is completely different from Tress, and that is Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. Now, this one is much more of a thriller. It's a very fast-paced novel. I read it in one day. I could not put it down. The story is set in present-day North America, and we're following 2 characters, June and Athena. June and Athena have both gone to Yale together. They've both entered the literary world around the same time with the publishing of their debut novels, and they've had mixed success in that department. Athena has had a meteoric rise. She has released bestseller after bestseller, one of which has been optioned for a Netflix film, whereas June has had less success. She's had some empty promises from her agent, from her publisher, and her first book was kind of a flop. June is white and Athena is Asian American. Despite their kind of strained relationship because of their differing levels of success, Athena and June have still kept in touch, and they're spending time together on the night where Athena tragically suddenly dies. Just before she died, Athena shared with June the finished manuscript of her masterpiece, which is an experimental novel that details the contributions of Chinese laborers during World War I. Athena is notoriously closed with the status of her writing projects. She doesn't show any of her new work to her agent or her publisher until the manuscript is absolutely completed, and for that reason, no one else knows that this exists. So in the hubbub of emergency services, June stuffs that finished manuscript in her tote bag, and she ultimately decides to publish it as her own book. Because we're inside June's head, following her voice and her rationale, we can see her becoming increasingly enmeshed in her deception. Since we're privy to all her inner thoughts and judgments, her misogyny, her microaggressions, and her rationale are open book to us. More than just a snarky novel, Yellowface is meant to expose some of the gross inequity that we see in the publishing world today. It's hitting on topics like racism, cultural appropriation, and the erasure of Asian American voices in literature. I gave this one 4 stars, and I would say if you normally read literary fiction or thrillers, you will really enjoy this book. It helps if you have a little bit of context about the online book sphere, whether it be BookTube, book reviews, Goodreads, publishing at all. But if you don't, this book's still gonna fill in some of those gaps. You're still going to be outraged and shocked and entertained by this book, even if you don't have that additional level of context. The next two books that I read, you're going to recognize from my reading vlog, where I read 3 book of the month picks in 3 days. The first of which is The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brammer. In this book, we're following 30-something Clover, and Clover works as a death doula. Her parents died at a very young age, and she's been raised by her grandfather, who has also recently passed away. And we're following her to some of her clients' homes as she accompanies them in their last hours. She listens to their dreams, their fears, and their regrets. She keeps records of those in 3 different notebooks at home, and she tries to do something in her own life that kind of counteracts the regret that they had or the desire that they never followed through on. Now this one just fell short of what I was hoping for. It's a little bit of a lighter novel. It was also kind of in Hallmark movie territory in my opinion. I ultimately didn't feel very connected to Clover as a main character, so for that reason I didn't love this one. A surprising 5-star that was also in that video is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This one ended up in my mid-year book tag because I mentioned it as a book that was a really great surprise. I would class this book as adult fiction, but it also might have a toe in the mystery camp. It's set in present day where we're following Lucy, who is in her late 20s. She is a teacher's aide in an elementary school, and she enjoys sharing her love of reading with the other students there. She's attached to one student in particular, in Christopher, who has lost his parents at a young age, and he has been in the foster care system ever since. All Lucy dreams of is having enough money in order to buy a place of her own and be able to adopt Christopher to have the family that she's always wanted. When she was younger, Lucy found comfort in a children's book series called Clock Island, which followed several different children who had mysterious adventures on Clock Island. The author of the series, Jack Masterson, is just as mysterious as his books, and he kind of disappeared from the public eye a decade or more ago, and he has not released a new addition to the series since. The book's illustrator, Hugo Reese, also lives on the real-life Clock Island, and he's been begging Jack to not waste his talents and to finally write another book. So it comes as a shock to Hugo as well as the world at large when the author releases an announcement that he not only has already written a follow-up book to the series, but he plans to give the publishing rights to the winner of a series of challenges to take place on his island. The guest list is by invitation only, but they are going to include the children who over the years have run away to Clock Island because they were searching for the kind of home and the kind of acceptance that they weren't finding in their real lives, and so that was when they met the author in person. The author, of course, consistently sent those children back home again, and Lucy happens to be one of those children who had run away to Clock Island. So when she hears the news, she's very excited that she might be on that guest list. If you like movies like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Knives Out, and you are also interested in series that have a treasure hunt at the center, perhaps like the Inheritance games, which I personally didn't love, but I think is a good comparison, I think you will like this one. The author, Meg Schaefer, has a background in screenwriting. If I was art directing a Netflix adaptation of this book, I would want it to look kind of like A Series of Unfortunate Events on Netflix and The Mysterious Benedict Society on Disney Plus, because I think it would be great for it to be kind of creepy, but also very colorful, and that's just what I imagine in my head. So let me know if you've read this, what you think, and I'm excited to see where this book goes. The last incentive I can give you to read this one is that the author explained that what she wants to write is children's books for adults. The next book that I read in June is Exit Strategy by Martha Wells, and I'm still enjoying my time in the Murderbot series. Without giving away any spoilers, I feel like this one was kind of more of a vehicle to get us from one destination to another. For this one, I had to bring my star rating back down to 3 because it just didn't reveal a whole lot more about our main character or about the plot overall. It kind of felt like it was just a segue book. The next book I read is the second in the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy by Juliette Marillier, and that is Tower of Thorns. This novel is going to open with our 2 main characters, Blackthorn and Grimm, who are staying with the two central characters from book 1. A mysterious lady arrives at the court, and she is asking for help because her home and her village is troubled by a monster. The monster lives in a tower not far off her land. Every summer, the mysterious figure in the tower screams from sunrise to sunset, and its screaming can be heard from miles around. It affects people's health, it affects the livestock and the crops, or at least it conveniently correlates to how those things are doing. She doesn't know exactly how to solve the problem, but she does know that she needs to have a young woman who is wise come and address the situation, and so she implores for their help. And of course, the first person who comes to mind is our main character, Blackthorn. And so she and Grimm take off on another adventure. In this one, we learn a lot more about Grimm's past trauma, whereas in book 1, we had more of a full picture of what had happened to Blackthorn in the past. I still love the writing style, I love the approachability of our two main characters, and the fantasy setting is really cool. I also really appreciate in this book in particular how we can see that our two main characters are dealing with issues like grief, resentment, acceptance, and faith. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I am currently reading the 3rd and final book in the series, Den of Wolves, this month. The next book definitely wins for book with the longest title, and that is The Making of Another Major Motion Picture Masterpiece by Tom Hanks. Initially start following the main character of Robert. He grew up with some artistic talent, meeting an uncle who had served in World War II in Japan, and his uncle made one comment about what he did when he was there, and his nephew took that and later in life he adapted that into a comic book series featuring a superhero-like character called Firefall. As the reader, we're following both the making of the movie as well as the origin of that comic book, and we do get to know Robert and his family a little better, but I would say the strongest point of the book is after that halfway point where we start to see the crew come together for the making of that motion picture. I really enjoyed getting to see the different people who are behind the scenes on a movie set, such as the producer, the production assistants, those who are driving vehicles, even the people who are sitting in a dark tent where no one else can see them, watching to make sure that everything looks the way that it should in the frame. There's a lot of high-level detail that has gone into making sure that all of those different areas, from makeup to production to acting, are covered versus just the directors and the actors that we're used to see highlighted in a movie making setting. I ultimately ended up giving this book 3 stars. I'm glad that I gave it a read. It was not a new favorite, but I did enjoy my time with it. First, I want to recap that my initial thoughts were that this would be a heartwarming generational tale that brought us on the inside of not only how family stories are passed, but also the movie making process from a book to screen adaptation. And I will say it did give me a little bit of each of those, but it was more heavy on the movie making side. It is a historical fiction that takes its time. We don't do a whole lot of jumping back and forth between the past and the present. It is more adult in content than I expected. The writing style is kind of from a third-person narrator, which I think allowed Tom Hanks to kind of not only project his own personal style in what he was writing, but also to kind of give us a little bit of a nostalgic viewpoint, because sometimes it seems like the person who is writing is set in the 1980s perhaps, with the way that they talk about relationships on the set, the way that they talk about the golden age of Hollywood and the ambitions that people have for stardom. It seems very much set in that era. So yes, 3 stars, not a new favorite, but I did enjoy it. The last book that I read in the month of June is my pick for a book that has a summer word in the title, and that was A Million Junes by author Emily Henry. Now, this is very different from the Emily Henry books that you may be used to if you like to pick up her paperback romances. However, we still do have a young romance at the heart of this young adult novel. It just also has some haunting elements like a changing landscape, some ghosts, and a little bit of magical realism. If Emily Henry's books were perfume, I would say that her typical romance books are kind of a light flowery scent with maybe notes of lemon, white tea, and rose. whereas this book has more sharper notes like pine, amber, rain, and musk. It's certainly a darker setting than you would expect from a typical Emily Henry novel, but it's not a wholly different novel. The only thing that might feel a little different in this one is that the story is written in first person, and our main character, June, has a desire to be a writer, but at times she slips into a narrative voice, a very descriptive, observer type language that could only come from Emily Henry. So sometimes that took me out of the plot a little bit, but I would say if you don't think that's going to be a deal breaker for you, go ahead and give this one a read because it does have that beautiful writing style and it has some really strong imagery for things like grief and forgiveness. Well, that's all the books that I read in the month of June. What did you think? Were there any that you recognized or any that you're looking forward to picking up? Please feel free to leave me book recommendations or video ideas in the comments below. I love hearing from you, and I will see you in another video soon.